On 2nd November, the year 2000, at a bomb blast at Malom, at the southeastern outskirts of Imphal town, retaliatory fire by the Indian security forces resulted in killing 10 civilians, including a 62-year-old woman. Public agitation reached unprecedented heights. Students, human rights activists, and the women of the state rose against the Armed Forces Special Powers Act again. The government announced curfew for 2 days. The armed forces also organized such operations for the perpetrators of the bomb blast. In the brutal combing operation, 42 people were hospitalized, including a 38-year-old woman. In the incident of the public agitation, a 28-year-old virgin, Irom Sarmila, decided to fast unto death till the Armed Forces Special Powers Act 1958 was removed. On 6 November, Sarmila was arrested, and the police charged her with an attempt to commit suicide under 309 IPC. Today, after 3 years, Sarmila is still in the security ward of the JN hospital, the act not yet removed from the state. Because of her refusal to take food, the government of Manipur force-fed her through the nose since November 21.
I suicide attempt tawriba misal amara natabra haidumadi miyamna adum khangna dana leide natara ai suicide attempt tawwa hawasida hana atasina madu oitari asiba ji am khawamga thandagi ko kan tawwa oitari electric bulb beri ko aingonda phiron marang kaina lei ngaksamji hem taw kaisunati haiwan deko.
Today, more than 1,000 days had passed. What makes her so stubborn and determined to sacrifice her life for a public cause? The removal of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, in the midst of thousands of ordinary women and girls who are now brought into the public sphere? What are the circumstances under which the women of state got embroiled in the social and political turmoil of the region? By the time Sarmila was born in March 1972, Manipur was just given the status of statehood by the Indian government. From an early independent Asiatic state in pre-colonial times, Manipur became a princely state of the British Indian Empire since 1891. After the British left, Manipur had a precarious independence for 2 years, 1947 to 49. In 1949, the state was merged into the Indian Union. The state had a painful apprenticeship as a Part C state, a Chief Commissioner's province, and later a territorial assembly was granted in 1963. For the ordinary women of the state, the peace and solemnity of the day-to-day activities were often broken by incidents of social and political unrest. Women, however, both in the hills and plains, were always there to look after the disadvantaged and weaker sections of society. The Sangamon Inn of Churachandpur is an excellent example for women in public cause at contemporary times of ethnic violence. It collected young orphans affected by ethnic crisis of 1993, started this inn in 1998, giving basic support for enabling the children to forget the past trauma and become good citizens.
Orphanage home do dan hi ele chil nam ke ka ethnic violence zati amaga jengthina badagi angang mama mapa leitaba mayam ama thorak padagi ekhoi ku ki women union na madugi burden ama angang sing si jengsin bada ekhoi gi mama ama oibagi saru yasi haina mase 1993 dagi horak paduna masigi ekhoi amen goal se 1998 15 October da with 8 children come into exist.
By 1975, when Sarmila was 3 years old, the public issues the women faced was on the problems of disequilibrium in society through male drunkenness, alcoholism and drugs. The harshness of the economy and lack of venue for reasonable employment opportunities led to many poor families in extended households beginning to brew and sell liquor. The government, in search of revenue, had opened Indian-made foreign liquor shops and bonded warehouses, and social effects of the economic move was devastating. The growth of an illicit international economy, where Manipur was one of the transit routes to heroin, drugs, gems, and other contraband goods, led to major sections of youths succumbing to temptation. Loosening of sexual morality, increasing departures from family mores of the young, and influences of mainstream visual media and other such features of national progress undermined traditional disciplines, and parents were losing authority. Women's contemporary proactive interventions in social causes was generated by the movement of Nisha Band, Stop Intoxicants, when nocturnal vigilante groups roamed the streets and lakais. In April 1975, the All Manipur Women's Social Reformation and Development Samaj was formed. It started a movement for prohibition of liquor in the state. To avert scenes of domestic crisis, of disquiet, fights, along with slow individual degeneration, women stood vigil at night. This women's prohibition movement began in sterling fashion at Kakching, 42 kilometers southeast of Imphal, a fast developing township with substantial productivity in rice, animal husbandry, and many government incentives. The scheduled caste community of Kakching was disturbed one December morning in 1975 when women and students attacked the liquor distilling houses in the hillside. The indigenous liquor barons struck back with violence, and some young people were heavily beaten up by thugs. A public crisis was generated at this model developing town. Public meeting was held between peasant elders, teachers, officials, with the women and the youths. The women passionately pleaded for prohibition. However, the Kaching gentlemen refused to oblige, for they would not do away the pastime, the evenings with the local brew. The Kaching gentlemen were earning fat sums from fast-growing piglets. But the basic foodstuff which induced fast growth in the farming was the solid rice waste yupang, which the liquor preparation produced. The connection between pig farming and liquor distillation was one of the unstated reasons for the local development beneficiaries refusing to prohibit liquor production. The development economy thus undermined gender at the Kaching region. The Nisha Ban movement at Kaching continued, with the women not objecting to liquor production and distillation, but taking severe action against consumers who trespassed social norms after getting drunk. The whole state reverberated with women moving about in the dark nights to prevent drunkenness. Prohibition was to come in 1990, but with little effect in social life. What took the women into deeper involvement in public life was the context of insurgency, the features of which became sharper in 1978. The armed confrontation between the state and non-state forces resulted in a spate of violence, the effect of which was felt by the simple village folk. Women were on the streets and maidans, this time with a totally changed outlook and action. On 26 April 1980, some insurgents shot down 2 paramilitary personnel and snatched away 2 rifles at the western village of Pachoikuno, Langjing. The Indian paramilitary forces retaliated with an immediate combing operation of the village. A peasant housewife called Bino Devi was shot dead in one of the households when her 7-year-old daughter survived.
Koisu nong mai kamne he khangde koi di yum da sai sing sa na leigani koi kamna basina machin da kamna rubani na koi na thok to koi har manung changthel leimi na kai no khangda ba ada koi sai sing sa leibani adi nongoi makhon khar ta gi di koi khangi adu dagi ngahak le ga siphai miyam CRP miyam sanga ga yum da leiram mi ji hoido ga thenga bu phu bani
moi na kap sal pa da ko nung da lot pa jani mayam la ko si ki no ko nung da lot pa ne ga Konung da do pa da shom dei ka pa da pha lang ko tina jang nge la ga Nongmai maruduna masa isak boriduna segala sepaga nongmai maruduna sila palaga si pakai bani angang ni ina utut le angang di sirangde akoina loksu e angang
akogi somda si hariba nupi si kibadagi wa dagi nupi angang sa thokidana imung duma thalebudi kidan lochabani ina da kholam tai ma khon sikana mi khar leire heta no yeng da nupi angang heta kap samin.
The incident sparked off women's agitations all around Imphal and the suburbs. Curfews were imposed and the market was dislocated for a week. On the 13th May 1980, the government announced that Manipur was a disturbed area and that maintenance of public order should be handed over to the army. Protests were raised all over and rallies were organized. The combing operations which were already on were asked to be stopped. Demands were raised that inquiries should be held by government on any incident of death or injuries on the common people at times of combing operations.
Manipur ta langjingi mihat pamti Manipur kan biu Manipur da swai put bir kan ai khoi gi sak thok na Manipur hingdei na khoi is swai me am put thorak ta na Manipur gi awa bata ka dore masin tawpin hu haidana akhoi le masala si haidana hongna rubal tan sakki
pasoi gi thokdok sigi chapane ba khoi di adagi ban thana dagi pharaga khoi ji puraba pubusi da khoi na phai ru khangdadana sum pangai rom da purak pasida masi pha ba wara male na akhoi di khako na khangak pane ba
moi khoi gi gari si sumai na mathun je hai gate gari si teli sa khoi mam si namme ya ba makai charu nam dong na namme gari si da yamna khudong thini ngai ni paibam ju leite phambam ju yaude ma thok marang khangdre khoi si hai dana chorok ki jaking da
piari si maning wai da man khar makha da phamne ba makha da phambadagi mar si ta khibne ba longna adagi ama manam mane habra moi lekai ne habra khaino aduma chu ta khre ba khar chalaga adu piari na hale ta badi ade piari si ma ne hek ta ba si da salan thongi khal lan thoga ta ba ne ba aduna ma hek ta ba aina maning de han ne yeng de ngo makhong makhula si satting thore ba asi siramani na dum haine re khoi ge manung da.
On 29th December 1980, at a night incident of a real physical confrontation with the military to snatch back a youth from being transported away, the women lit bamboo torches as a symbol of their motherly protection of the innocent son. Lit torches at night held by these women were to indicate their presence during counterinsurgency operations in the 80s. They came to be known as Mera Paibis, women torch holders. The large-scale combing operations organized in the urban and suburban areas led to many youths being picked up on suspicion of being members of the underground. Go! In March 1984, security forces opened fire to a volleyball crowd of some 3,000, when insurgents overpowered the security personnel and snatched arms. 13 people, including an 11-year-old girl, were killed.
Class 7 tame Khaimpan school da tamani maga magi mopas ki school kumakpa mayam sina magi mana ground no paji he rom patam da crime si thokpani na mana magi mopa class 3 tami ba angang se paktho oina mana hagot patigi paktho oina mana namdaba matam da luktharaga khogi angang si paktham ba matam da asai CRP sina nomaina magi nipi macha si sorok ta lari ya lepi ban nipi macha si nomaina kapaga hatpani ai koi jo
matamdo thabang khang check misti oidna thabang khang yam sudna sen yam thopa matamne adubo namittuda koigi laibak thibadagi ekhosu yawrure faraba matungdasu metnaga se usillaktadna laithai oin tawdna punchise adum mange thabang khang tawbi yakidre.
In July 1987, Hill's underground personnel attacked an Assam Rifles camp at Oinam village and killed 9 security personnel and looted a huge cache of arms.
Maduke counter-insurgency oina operation chathabadu thamari hena chathake aduga Oinam aduga magi akoibeda leiba khun more than 40 khun asida operation na du sathake asomena chathaba matamda mi ayambabu torture tawbire mi 15 bu hatkre aduga nupi ahumbo rape tawbire nupi anina concentration camp da angang pokhale amadi premature birth oibedigi angang amadi hinghaudare aduga nupi anisu torture tawbedigi miscarriage tawre aduga kanagumba mibudi torture tawba matamduda upside down hang tawbasu yawre aduga kanagumba mising ataibudi half buried to lebak da phumhanba adu asum haina torture kayamarum sathina tawbihi.
More and more women now became victims of the conflict. Incidents of rape associated with military and police violation of the dignity of womanhood were galore. It is not simple gratification of sexual urges, but there is a strong indication of a desire on the parts of the instruments of the Indian state to subjugate physically an alien population through sexual arrogance.
Nubigi ijat temsing na baduna punsi sida malim sida hingduna lairaroi haina magi mapunsi do suicide tawjagi ba thoriyam dana sikiba chanu rose gi wari nga si lairi aduga anjawigi ijat mangan khibagi aduga kakchingi thoinugi kairen phabigi kakchingi pramodini kairen phabigi thoinu asina chingba mayam ama nupi da ijat temsing na khibagi aduga nupi hatbagi asumba paring mayam.
Violence against women and civilians increased in intensity since the 80s. The women in the valley was too deeply aroused to stop their movement of resistance against this brutal oppression. The women were now in the throes of a struggle as a bulwark of resistance against excesses by the counterinsurgency operations. Deep racial and psychological prejudice accompany the attitude of security personnel when they work in the villages for counterinsurgency work. Incidents of physical assault, mutilation, decapitation, and grievous injuries to individual persons accompany the actions of the security forces. Ordinary village folk lost their precious limbs because of beatings. Dogs were released against the women, and bombs were thrown in the women's congregations. Brutal physical experiences suffered by these women in the context of counterinsurgency is unique in a democratic setup in India.
Sibai ai kapai se sisina hol hayam ko ai khong oina dak lepe bayana adegi hol hada blank phaya si tor firing hayaba aina blank taw gada na nomai chindon san yeng khalu bayana adaman firing hasan ta aina o miam punama siba tari nomai kapino na yaksina khul oina sin hayaba ko ade haibedi hekta nomai se adu haibaga adum prong prong kapak pone ai ti matam gyan ji mamme ko
akhoi ini sin ai ne khoi hum ji thangnaba khoi hum je hui thaujilaga chikhalle
Pugi chong mapan ji da mi phara na ina yum da gi chen ma kan ji da hui du thaujilak ta moina hui si ya thaujilak ta ingon da chi e
ada khoi na hai na haron asengbuda noi phabadi ima khoi na sumaina pangchong chong oi adu hujik parikha thariba isa sing noi phadra puhraga mama wai bisin kari oini mase tawba yade haidana akhoina khambasida moina yadre moina ngamdra gari sida hapka khareba ko hapkwani munthai tawre moi khoi yamna leinare yamna munnare murama matang sida moina huise sikpa si anaga adagi siphai amana maira pai bi myam jeni henjana ko kan sida haiba na sik masasina thega maira pai bi punamak sida ban phubane ba
Loktak project la riba bi shape se mathong gupte yamna ot nei ning thongda ju logda bagi su mi phui adagi ju do thakto ga nupi angang ising sokpa ya de mi si khachele mala do gale tenda sangi ba matam tana khona dana tawi aduna akhoi so adu gi meeting gi ama akhoi phama.
The women in movement in their relationship with the security forces highlight critical features of a colonized lived experience in conflict situations. The Mairapaibi see the security forces as oppressive and violating natural human laws. They expect that the Indian security forces, in their confrontation with the non-state forces, should have to behave with civilians and women with certain principles of ethics and civilized behavior. They expect treatment in fair and reasonable justicial norms, even in times of internal war. Their indigenous perceptions of right and wrong, however, ran counter to the state and the military's perception of insurgency and their expectations of citizens' response to the same.
Even when some part of the women would have suffered as a result of the counter-insurgency operation, we would like that suffering to stop. And that can only stop when peace comes to Manipur. And peace means there is no requirement for counter-insurgency because the insurgency would have ended. Therefore, we will be able to thereafter work together with the people for the good of the people of Manipur.
The Indian state's perception of the Manipur public's response to insurgency is clouded with a severe suspicion of the people's motives and feelings. The security forces see the Mairapaibi as a seal for the insurgent forces. They derisively nickname them the petticoat soldiers. A severe hegemonistic exercise for installing fear and subjection are being undertaken by the instruments of state. A cold presence is seen of a ruthless, oppressive force, which reduces to importance all institutions and prevalent laws. The common people have no alternative but sufferance, which Irom Sarmila seems to represent. The state of poverty, disillusionment and dejection act as ingredients to a non-active subjectivity. Sarmila remains confined, being shifted from court to jail, jail to hospital, and hospital to court again. Yet Sarmila responds with an internal defiance, a subdued defiance, a resistance born from the history of the women's struggles inherited from a long-cherished tradition. For the history of Manipur is the history of its women rising against oppression and affront to the dignity of the people. The women's struggle against the occupational forces during the 7 years devastation, the anti-colonial risings in the two women's wars of 1904 and 1939, and heroic activities by the women of the valley and hills in the anti-colonial struggles of the early 20th century were still cherished by the peoples today. The Mairapaibi today inherit the strength of collectivity and proactive presence in the public sphere. All these human agonies of killings, rape, mutilation, decapitation and torture could pass as homogenized images with sensuous lulling of mental and moral landscapes. A divorce of sense of self-respect and dignity of native players in contemporary society help continuance of the homogenization of state violence and terror. Insurgency could be interpreted as simple concomitants to public disturbance by disgruntled, antisocial, anti-national elements rising from unemployment and frustration. Women's movement under hardly diagnosed social and political environment could be interpreted in various levels of meaning and importance. The retreat of the state in governance, social, economic and political bankruptcy, and their continued failure to inspire the public towards solution of their problems had an adverse impact. It helped the Mairapaibi to increase in power and authority. Mairapaibis became arbiters in cases of domestic disharmony, adultery, and quarrels over property and inheritance. They even became mobile courts, which almost made the government family courts redundant. Flushed with success in political hustings, they rose in social predominance in the 90s. Mother power did become an intense syndrome in the civil society of Manipur in the 90s. Though the women's movement since the 90s became explosive in the use of interventionist energy, it was plagued by their inability to fathom the complex features in contemporary dynamics of social networks and relations. Changing patterns of people's behavior, wavering of moral and ethical principles under stress, were felt by ordinary women in the milieu of economic hardships. Adultery and prostitution became predominant, where the Mairapaibis, with their stringent actions, helped complicate domestic crisis. The use of excess punishment to liquor-selling families. The shaving of wrongdoing women's heads. The burning of liquor houses and homesteads all resulted to withdrawal of considerable women from the movement. Women activists bemoan the erosion of the collective principles and vociferous tendencies of division and self-seeking emerging within the ranks of the movement. Complete indifference of educated, urbanized women from middle-class households to the movement revealed unique symptoms of class difference, rural and urban divide, and other features of disunity and irreconcilability amongst the real world of Manipuri women. The Meirapaibi exist and work in pre-colonial forms of energy and culture, but changed structures of social, political, and economic realities had revealed incongruences, contradictions, and conflict within the movement. Unfathomable complexities of modern political economy had worked on fragile social and economic foundations. Sarmila, now 31 years old, and 3 years since she began her fast, with bodily rhythm impaired, silent and immobile, now reflects the ontological reality of the Manipur state in nearly 30 years of statehood under the Indian dispensation. With her languishing in silence in the security ward of a government hospital, she reflects the nature of contemporary existential anguish of the Manipuri nation, the deep social and political apathy, and non-exercise of political will by the people and government. But her resistance is unique in the true tradition of Manipuri womanhood. The Imas of today are with her. So shall they, if any calamity befalls her life.